The flight attendant's smug smile vanished when Federal Aviation Administration credentials flashed before her eyes. For the past hour, Isaiah and Zoe Washington had endured humiliation in first class simply because of their skin color. Now 30,000 feet above Arizona, the tables had dramatically turned. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed discrimination while traveling, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community fighting for comment. Equality. Now buckle up. This flight is about to get turbulent. Isaiah Washington adjusted his navy blue tie as he and his wife Zoe rolled their carry-ons through Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. At 43, Isaiah carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent over 2 decades ensuring the safety of millions of air travelers. His salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him a distinguished appearance that usually commanded respect. 22 years at the Federal Aviation Administration, and I still get excited about flying, he said, squeezing Zoe's hand. Zoe, 41, with her natural hair styled in an elegant updo, smiled at her husband. Her cream pantsuit contrasted beautifully with her dark skin. As an FAA safety inspector like her husband, she shared his passion for aviation. "Well, we rarely fly as passengers, let alone in first class," she replied, "and never for something as special as Jasmine's graduation." Their daughter Jasmine was graduating from Howard University with honors in aerospace engineering, following in her parents' footsteps. This trip was their gift to themselves after years of hard work and sacrifice. "I still can't believe our baby is graduating," Isaiah said, his voice filled with pride. They had splurged on first-class tickets, with Skyline Airways wanting to start their celebration in style. After months of rigorous airline inspections, they deserved this luxury. "Remember our agreement," Zoe whispered as they approached the premium check-in counter. "We're just ordinary passengers today. No mention of the FAA." It was their standard practice when traveling for personal reasons. They wanted to experience air travel just like regular passengers, without special treatment. Of course, Isaiah nodded. Just Mr. and Mrs. Washington on a trip to see their daughter graduate. The first hint that something was off came at the premium check-in counter. The agent, a blonde woman in her 30s, glanced at them with surprise when they stepped forward. "Economy check-in is over there," she said, pointing to a long line across the terminal. "We have first-class tickets," Isaiah explained, calmly sliding their reservation and ID cards across the counter. The agent's eyebrows raised slightly as she verified their information. Isaiah and Zoe exchanged a knowing glance. They had experienced this kind of treatment before. After finally receiving their boarding passes, with a reluctant, "Enjoy your flight," they made their way to the priority security line. "Just like old times," Zoe murmured, remembering when they first met at the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City. Both had been among the few black trainees in their class drawn together by shared experiences and ambitions. "Remember our first inspection together in Dallas?" Isaiah asked. "How could I forget? That senior inspector couldn't believe we were qualified to evaluate his precious airline." Zoe laughed. They had built their careers together, challenging stereotypes and earning respect through impeccable professionalism and expertise. Now they were among the most respected inspection teams in the agency's Western Division. As they boarded through the priority lane, Isaiah noted with professional habit the condition of the jet bridge and the greeting procedures. The Boeing 787 gleamed in the Arizona sun, its engines humming with promise of the journey ahead. "Good afternoon, welcome aboard," a flight attendant greeted the passengers ahead of them with a warm smile. When the Washington stepped forward, her smile remained, but her eyes reflected momentary surprise. "Seats 2A and 2B, just to your left," she said, with noticeably less warmth. "Thank you," Zoe responded politely, as they made their way to their spacious first-class accommodations. The leather seats were wide and comfortable with ample legroom. Isaiah stored their carry-ons in the overhead compartments and settled beside his wife. This was definitely worth the splurge, he whispered, taking in the luxurious cabin. Little did they know that their celebration was about to turn into one of the most challenging situations of their professional lives, testing not only their patience, but their commitment to accountability in the industry they had served for over 2 decades. Isaiah settled into seat 2A, admiring the spacious legroom and wide armrests of first class. Zoe adjusted her seat position beside him in 2B, her fingers tracing the leather upholstery. "This is how the other half lives," she whispered with a smile. Flight attendant Meredith Parker, a slim woman in her mid-30s with perfectly styled blonde hair, moved efficiently through the first-class cabin, offering pre-flight beverages to passengers. She stopped at row 1, where an elderly white couple sat. "Good afternoon. Welcome aboard Skyline Airways. May I offer you champagne, orange juice, or water before takeoff?" The couple requested champagne, which Meredith served with a flourish. She continued this level of attentiveness with each white passenger, engaging in friendly conversation about their destinations and comfort. When she reached the Washingtons, her demeanor changed subtly. Her smile tightened and her eyes barely met theirs. "Anything to drink?" she asked curtly. "Champagne would be lovely," Zoe replied warmly, attempting to bridge the sudden chill. Meredith nodded without response and moved to the next row, where she immediately resumed her friendly banter with a white businessman. Isaiah and Zoe exchanged glances but said nothing. They had experienced this behavior throughout their lives and careers. 10 minutes passed. Every other first-class passenger had received their drinks, but the Washingtons' glasses remained empty. Isaiah pressed the call button. Meredith saw it illuminate, but busied herself reorganizing items in the galley. After the 3rd attempt, she finally approached with visible reluctance. "Yes," she asked, with an edge to her voice. "We ordered champagne earlier," Isaiah reminded her politely. "Right. We're a bit short-staffed today," she replied, though only 2 flight attendants served the 12 first-class passengers, the standard number. She returned with 2 plastic cups of champagne, unlike the crystal glasses other passengers received. Across the aisle in seat 2C sat Richard Davenport, a 58-year-old executive with a ruddy complexion and expensive watch. He had been observing the interaction with thinly veiled disdain. "They're letting just anyone into first class these days," he muttered to his seatmate, loudly enough for the Washingtons to hear. "Probably used points or got upgraded. They don't understand the etiquette." Isaiah placed a calming hand on Zoe's knee as she tensed. As FAA safety inspectors, they were trained to observe all aspects of flight operations, including crew behavior. Both noticed that during the safety briefing, Meredith demonstrated oxygen masks thoroughly for white passengers, but skipped checking seatbelts entirely for them. More concerning, Isaiah noticed the emergency exit row briefing was rushed and incomplete, a clear violation of federal regulations. "Should we say something?" Zoe whispered. "That exit row briefing was insufficient." "Let's wait," Isaiah replied quietly. "We're off duty, but I'm documenting everything mentally." As the plane reached cruising altitude, service disparities continued. Meredith took meal orders from other passengers, first leaving the Washingtons until last. When she finally reached them, her pen hovered impatiently. "The chicken or pasta?" she asked, without explaining the dishes as she had for others. "Could you please describe the options?" Zoe requested. Meredith sighed. "Chicken with vegetables or pasta with sauce." "That's not very descriptive," Isaiah noted. "What kind of sauce? How is the chicken prepared?" "It's airline food," Meredith replied dismissively. "Not a 5-star restaurant." Richard Davenport snickered. "Some people don't know their place," he commented to his companion. The situation escalated when Zoe discovered her tray table was unstable, a potential safety hazard during turbulence. "Excuse me," she called to Meredith. "This table needs maintenance." Meredith barely glanced at it. "It seems fine to me." "It's wobbling significantly." As a safety concern, it should be documented and reported to maintenance. Zoe insisted, her professional knowledge surfacing. I think I know what constitutes a safety concern on an aircraft, Meredith snapped. This caught the attention of Chief Flight Attendant Trevor Blake, a tall man in his late 40s with prematurely gray hair and an authoritative presence. He approached with a forced smile. Is there a problem here, he asked, addressing Meredith rather than the Washingtons. These passengers are being difficult about a tray table, Meredith explained, emphasizing these with subtle contempt. Isaiah spoke up calmly. My wife reported a legitimate safety concern with an unstable tray table which was dismissed without proper inspection. Trevor barely glanced at the table. Everything appears to be in working order to me. Perhaps you should check more thoroughly, Zoe suggested, her professional inspector's tone emerging naturally. Trevor's expression hardened. I've been flying for 25 years, ma'am. I think I know when something is a safety issue. A white passenger across the aisle began recording the interaction on his phone, which prompted others to do the same. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Maybe you both would be more comfortable in economy, Trevor suggested with false concern. I could arrange to have you moved. We paid for first class, and that's where we'll remain, Isaiah stated firmly. Our comfort isn't the issue here. Proper safety procedures are. Trevor leaned closer, lowering his voice. Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The captain has authority to remove disruptive passengers. Disruptive, Zoe repeated incredulously. For pointing out a safety concern. For expecting equal service. Isaiah maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened. Throughout the confrontation, he noted Trevor's name tag was improperly positioned, another minor but telling violation of uniform standards. We're not being disruptive, Isaiah stated calmly. We're simply requesting the same service and attention to safety concerns that other passengers receive. Trevor straightened his posture. I'll give you one more chance to cooperate, or I'll need to involve the captain. As the confrontation continued, the true test of the Washingtons' professional integrity and personal dignity was just beginning to unfold 30,000 feet above the Arizona desert. Captain Miles Bradshaw emerged from the cockpit, his uniform crisp and his captain's hat tucked under his arm. At 52, his weathered face and confident stride spoke of thousands of flight hours. He surveyed the first-class cabin with practiced authority before his eyes landed on the Washingtons. I understand we have a situation, he said, addressing Trevor rather than speaking directly to Isaiah and Zoe. These passengers are disrupting the flight, Trevor reported, gesturing toward the Washingtons. They've been uncooperative and confrontational since boarding. Isaiah straightened in his seat. Captain, that's simply not true. We've been subjected to discriminatory treatment and raised legitimate safety concerns about a faulty tray table. Captain Bradshaw barely glanced at the table in question. My flight attendants are highly trained professionals. If they don't consider it a safety issue, then it isn't one. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on either of the FAA inspectors, but they maintained their composure. Furthermore, the captain continued, I have reports that you've been argumentative and making other passengers uncomfortable. Richard Davenport seized the opportunity. They don't belong up here, he interjected loudly. First class has standards. Several other white passengers nodded in agreement, while a few looked uncomfortable with the obvious prejudice on display. I paid the same price for these seats as everyone else, Zoe stated firmly. And as American citizens, we have the right to equal treatment. This isn't about race, Trevor insisted unconvincingly. It's about behavior. From 3 rows back, a young Asian woman named Grace Chen had been recording the entire interaction. I've been watching since boarding, she called out. They've done absolutely nothing wrong. This is textbook discrimination. Captain Bradshaw ignored her comment. I have the authority to divert this aircraft if disruptive behavior continues, he warned, looking directly at the Washingtons for the first time. Is that what you want? To inconvenience everyone on this flight? "We want equal treatment and proper attention to safety protocols," Isaiah replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." Air Marshal Dominic Reed observed the confrontation silently from his seat in row 4. His trained eye noted that the Washingtons were calm and reasonable, while the crew appeared increasingly agitated. As a black man himself, he recognized the situation unfolding but was constrained by his duty to intervene only for genuine security threats. Captain Zoe said, her voice level, despite her rising indignation, "We have no desire to disrupt this flight. We simply expect the same service and respect afforded to other passengers." Isaiah noticed that during this entire confrontation, at least 3 flight attendants had failed to secure the galley for turbulence, leaving beverage carts unlocked. Another clear violation that he mentally documented. "I've made my decision," Captain Bradshaw announced. "For the comfort of our other passengers, we're going to reseat you in the economy section." He turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this disruption. We have a situation with some disruptive passengers that we're handling. Your safety and comfort are our priority." The public humiliation was calculated and devastating. Several passengers shook their heads sympathetically at the crew, not the victims of this discrimination. Meredith smiled triumphantly as she began gathering the Washingtons' belongings without their permission. "Don't touch our things," Zoe said firmly, standing to reclaim her laptop from Meredith's hands. "You're only making this worse for yourselves," Trevor warned. "Either move voluntarily or face consequences when we land." With no choice but to comply or risk arrest upon landing, a familiar dilemma for Black Americans standing up for their rights, the Washingtons gathered their belongings. The walk of shame through first class was excruciating. Richard Davenport smirked as they passed. A few passengers averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the injustice but unwilling to speak up. Grace continued recording her expression, conveying silent support. When they reached economy, the final indignity awaited. They weren't even seated together. Isaiah was assigned to 23C, a middle seat, while Zoe was placed in 31D, 8 rows away. "You can't separate us," Isaiah protested. "These are the only available seats," Trevor claimed, though several empty pairs were clearly visible. "Unless you'd prefer we divert the plane and have you removed entirely." As they reluctantly separated, Zoe caught Isaiah's eye with a look that communicated volumes. This wasn't just about their ruined celebration anymore. This was about accountability. Back in the first-class cabin, the conversation returned to normal, but the tension lingered. Grace Chen continued recording intermittently, determined to document the injustice she was witnessing. Air Marshal Reed remained vigilant, his training at odds with his conscience as the situation unfolded. The stage was set for a confrontation none of the crew could have anticipated, as Isaiah Washington took his middle seat in row 23, quietly calculating exactly how many federal aviation regulations had been violated in the last 30 minutes alone. Zoe Washington sat rigidly in seat 31D, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the armrests. 8 rows separated her from Isaiah, and the humiliation of being paraded through the cabin burned in her chest. A flight attendant different from the first-class crew offered drinks to her row, and Zoe declined with a tight smile. From her new vantage point, she observed another black passenger, an elderly man in his 70s, requesting assistance with his overhead bag. The same flight attendant who had served her drinks responded with visible irritation, helping white passengers before reluctantly attending to him. Something inside Zoe snapped. This wasn't just about her and Isaiah anymore. This was a pattern, a systemic issue that affected countless passengers who lacked the platform to speak up. Meanwhile, Isaiah sat uncomfortably in 23C, sandwiched between 2 passengers. The businessman to his right was sprawled across the armrest, while the woman to his left kept shooting him suspicious glances. His mind raced through federal regulations, crew behavior requirements, discrimination prohibitions, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, as applied to air carriers' safety protocol violations. He made a decision. Pressing the call button, Isaiah waited patiently. After being ignored for several minutes, he pressed it again. Finally, a flight attendant approached with visible reluctance. "Sir, we're in the middle of beverage service. What do you need?" "I need to speak with Air Marshal Reed," Isaiah said quietly, making sure his seatmates couldn't hear. The flight attendant's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please inform Air Marshal Reed in row 4 that FAA Inspector Isaiah Washington needs to speak with him urgently regarding flight safety concerns." The color drained from her face. "Your FAA?" Isaiah maintained eye contact without responding further. The flight attendant hurried away, whispering urgently to her colleagues. 5 minutes later, Air Marshal Dominic Reed appeared at Isaiah's row. At 38, Reed had the build of a former athlete and the watchful eyes of a trained observer. "Sir, would you come with me, please?" Reed requested professionally. In the privacy of the rear galley, Isaiah discreetly displayed his FAA credentials. "Senior Safety Inspector Isaiah Washington, Western Division. My wife, Inspector Zoe Washington, is seated in 31D. We were removed from first class after raising legitimate safety concerns and experiencing discriminatory treatment." Reed's posture changed immediately. "I witnessed the confrontation but didn't realize. I should have intervened." "This isn't just about our seats," Isaiah explained. "We've documented multiple safety violations and concerning patterns of behavior that warrant official review." Reed nodded gravely. "I'll speak with the captain immediately." As Reed headed toward the cockpit, Isaiah made his way to Zoe's seat, ignoring protests from flight attendants. "Something's happening," he whispered to her, noting the urgent activity now visible among the crew. In the cockpit, Reed briefed Captain Bradshaw on the situation. "FAA inspectors." "Are you certain?" Bradshaw asked, his face paling. "I verified their credentials myself," Reed confirmed. "They've been documenting safety violations throughout the flight." Bradshaw ran a hand through his hair. "Christ. Get him back to first class immediately. Tell Parker and Blake to report to the cockpit." The atmosphere on the plane shifted dramatically. Meredith Parker approached the Washingtons with a strained smile, entirely unlike her previous demeanor. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. We'd like to escort you back to your original seats in first class." Zoe looked at the flight attendant with composed dignity. "I see. And what exactly was misunderstood?" Meredith faltered. "There was confusion about seating arrangements." "Was there confusion about the color of our skin as well?" Isaiah asked quietly. Without waiting for a response, they gathered their belongings and followed her to the front of the plane. As they walked, passengers looked on with curiosity, sensing the dramatic reversal unfolding. Richard Davenport's expression transformed from smug satisfaction to confusion as the Washingtons returned to their original first-class seats beside him. "What's going on?" he demanded of Trevor, who was now hovering nervously nearby. "A misunderstanding has been clarified," Trevor responded vaguely, sweat beading on his forehead. Over the next 20 minutes, passengers watched as multiple crew members approached the Washingtons with obsequious attention. Captain Bradshaw himself emerged from the cockpit twice to check on their comfort. "What do you think about how this situation is unfolding?" Comment number 1, if you believe the crew should be held accountable for their discriminatory actions. Or number 2, if you think the Washingtons should just accept the apology and move on. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination and stayed silent, and subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing up against injustice. Could you have maintained your composure like Isaiah and Zoe did in the face of such blatant discrimination, or would you have reacted differently? And what do you think happens next as this flight continues, with the crew now realizing they've been mistreating federal aviation officials? Stay tuned to find out how these FAA inspectors turn the tables in an unexpected way. As the Boeing 787 continued its journey eastward, Isaiah and Zoe Washington settled back into their first-class seats with the quiet dignity that had defined their 20-year careers. The cabin atmosphere had transformed completely, with the crew now hovering attentively around them, offering fresh drinks in proper crystal glasses and apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding. Behind their composed expressions, however, the Washingtons had silently shifted into professional mode. Without exchanging a word, they implemented the inspection protocol they had perfected over decades of working together. Isaiah casually removed his leather portfolio from his carry-on. To an untrained eye, it appeared he might be doing a crossword puzzle or jotting down vacation notes. In reality, he was documenting every safety violation they had observed using the standardized notation system of FAA inspectors. "More champagne, Mr. Washington," Meredith Parker asked, her formerly cold demeanor replaced with nervous attentiveness. "Thank you," he replied politely, noting how she now carefully placed a proper napkin under his drink, a courtesy she had denied them earlier. Meanwhile, Zoe activated the note-taking app on her phone, disguising her documentation as casual texting. She had positioned herself to observe the main cabin service recording timestamps of safety procedure violations. The Washingtons had developed an unspoken communication system during their years conducting surprise inspections. A slight tap of Isaiah's index finger on the armrest, he'd noticed an unsecured galley cart. Zoe's casual adjustment of her watch, she was timing the response to a passenger's call button, finding it well outside acceptable parameters. Isaiah's mind flashed back to their inspection of Northern Pacific Airlines in 2018, where similar casual observations had uncovered systematic safety violations that led to a major industry shakeup. Zoe had been the one to notice flight attendants skipping safety briefings for non-English speaking passengers, while Isaiah documented maintenance log discrepancies. "We're not here to cause trouble," Isaiah had told the defensive Northern Pacific executives during that investigation. "We're here to ensure every passenger goes home safely to their families." That airline was now recognized for its exemplary safety culture after implementing the Washingtons' recommended changes. Back on Skyline Flight 1143, Zoe methodically reviewed the safety information card in her seat pocket, comparing it to the actual equipment on board. She discreetly photographed a discrepancy between the depicted life vest location and the actual storage position. Another violation. In the galley, Trevor Blake huddled with Meredith Parker, their whispered conversation just audible to Isaiah's trained ear. "This is a disaster," Trevor muttered. "They're FAA inspectors. Do you know what they can do?" "How was I supposed to know?" Meredith hissed back. "They didn't identify themselves." "They shouldn't have to identify themselves to be treated with respect," Trevor replied belatedly, recognizing the obvious. "Chandler warned us after that incident last month with those doctors from Atlanta." Isaiah's eyebrows raised slightly. "Not an isolated incident, then." He made a note to request past complaint records for Skyline Airways dating back 12 months. Across the aisle, Richard Davenport squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier boldness evaporated. He made several attempts to catch Isaiah's eye, clearly hoping for an opportunity to backtrack on his previous comments. Isaiah focused instead on examining the emergency exit row, several rows behind first class. The passengers seated there had received only a cursory briefing, another violation he documented meticulously. Zoe, meanwhile, had engaged in casual conversation with Grace Chen, who had relocated to a nearby seat during the commotion. "I fly this airline twice monthly for work," Grace confided quietly. "What happened to you wasn't unusual. I've documented similar incidents repeatedly." She discreetly showed Zoe a folder on her phone containing dozens of videos cataloging discriminatory treatment of passengers of color. "Would you be willing to provide official testimony?" Zoe asked softly. "Absolutely," Grace replied without hesitation. It's time somebody held them accountable. In the cockpit, Captain Bradshaw was reviewing the aircraft's maintenance logs with growing concern. Isaiah had requested to see them out of professional courtesy, a request that couldn't be denied to a federal inspector. What Bradshaw didn't know was that Isaiah had already spotted inconsistencies in the safety card information that suggested maintenance issues with the emergency lighting system. Cross-reference maintenance log entries from March 14th regarding emergency pathway lighting, Isaiah texted to Zoe using their secure agency phones. The Washingtons had uncovered a pattern of documentation irregularities that suggested systematic corner cutting, potentially explaining the crew's defensive reaction to their initial safety concerns. As beverage service continued, other passengers began to notice the special attention the couple was receiving. "Are they celebrities? Or something?" a woman whispered loudly from row 3. Federal aviation officials, her seatmate replied, having overheard crew conversations. The staff discriminated against them without realizing who they were. This whispered revelation spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers turning to observe the unfolding drama with newfound interest. Trevor approached with a complimentary amenity kit. "I want to personally apologize again for the confusion earlier," he said, his professionalism firmly back in place. "If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Zoe replied evenly. "Though I wonder if the elderly black gentleman in row 27 who's been waiting for assistance for the past 20 minutes might appreciate some attention as well." Trevor's face flushed as he immediately dispatched a flight attendant to assist. Isaiah continued his methodical documentation, noting with professional detachment that this flight had already accumulated enough violations for significant penalties. But the most serious issue wasn't the technical infractions. It was the culture of discrimination that clearly permeated the airline's service model. As the flight progressed toward the halfway point, the Washingtons had compiled a comprehensive record of both safety violations and discriminatory practices. Their silent observation was building a case that would have consequences far beyond this single flight, reaching into boardrooms and potentially reshaping policies for the entire industry. The real inspection had only just begun. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft continued its journey eastward. The soft chime of the intercom broke the relative quiet of the first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bradshaw speaking. We're expecting some mild turbulence ahead, so I've illuminated the seatbelt sign as a precaution. All passengers should return to their seats at this time." Minutes later, rather than remaining in the cockpit as captains typically did during potential turbulence, Captain Bradshaw himself appeared in the first-class cabin. His captain's hat was tucked under his arm and his expression was a careful mask of professional contrition. He approached the Washington's row and cleared his throat. "Inspectors Washington," he began loud enough for nearby passengers to hear the title clearly. "I'd like to personally express my deepest apologies for the treatment you received earlier." The deliberate use of their professional designation sent an immediate ripple through the cabin. Richard Davenport nearly choked on his scotch. "On behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to assure you that what occurred does not reflect our company values or training protocols," Captain Bradshaw continued. "I take full responsibility as the commanding officer of this aircraft." Isaiah maintained his professional demeanor. "Captain, we appreciate your apology, but this isn't about us personally. It's about ensuring every passenger receives equal treatment and that all safety protocols are properly followed." Zoe added, "We've observed multiple violations of federal aviation regulations during this flight beyond the discriminatory treatment we experienced." Captain Bradshaw's professional smile faltered slightly. "I'd be happy to discuss any concerns you have in private." "That won't be necessary at this time," Isaiah replied. "We'll be submitting a formal report through appropriate channels." Several passengers were now openly watching the interaction. Richard Davenport, who had loudly supported their removal earlier, sank deeper into his seat, suddenly fascinated by the view outside his window. "Inspectors." A woman from across the aisle leaned forward. "Did he say you're inspectors? With the government?" Before either Washington could respond, Meredith Parker appeared with fresh drinks, her hands visibly shaking. "Here are your beverages as requested," she said, placing them carefully on their tray tables with trembling fingers. Trevor Blake hovered nearby, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Captain Bradshaw attempted to salvage the situation. "Again, my sincere apologies. If you'd like to discuss specific concerns, I'd be happy to." "Excuse me," Richard Davenport suddenly interjected, his face flushed with embarrassment or alcohol, or both. "I want to apologize as well for my earlier comments. I had no idea you were federal officials." Zoe fixed him with a level gaze. Would it have mattered? Should passengers receive different treatment based on their occupation or the color of their skin? Davenport stammered, "No, of course not. I just meant—" Sir Isaiah interrupted calmly, "The issue isn't that we were mistreated as FAA inspectors. The issue is that we were mistreated as black passengers. That distinction matters." As the truth dawned on the entire cabin, Grace Chen seized the moment to approach from her seat. "Inspectors Washington, I'm Grace Chen. I've been documenting discriminatory treatment on Skyline flights for months." She offered her business card. "I'd be happy to share my evidence if it would help your investigation." The captain's expression tightened. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We're expecting turbulence." Grace stood her ground. "Actually, the fasten seatbelt sign wasn't illuminated until you came out here to damage control." She turned back to the Washingtons. "I have footage from 6 different Skyline flights showing similar discriminatory patterns. This public revelation sparked other passengers to speak up. I saw how they treated you at boarding. A woman in row 3 called out. It was appalling. They did the same thing to a Hispanic family on my flight last month," added another passenger. Trevor Blake attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But the dam had broken. Passengers throughout first class and from the forward rows of economy began sharing stories of witness discrimination. One business traveler mentioned filing a complaint that had been ignored. A flight attendant from another airline traveling as a passenger described systemic issues she'd observed at Skyline. Meredith Parker retreated to the galley, her face ashen. The captain, recognizing he was losing control of the narrative, attempted to redirect. "Inspectors Washington, perhaps we could continue this discussion after we land. I'm sure we can reach a satisfactory resolution." "This isn't about reaching a resolution for us personally," Isaiah explained. "This appears to be a systemic issue requiring a formal investigation." Zoe added, "Captain, based on passenger testimonies and our own observations, this seems to be a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident." Richard Davenport, still trying to salvage his reputation, leaned across the aisle. "For what it's worth, I've never seen anything like this on other airlines. Must be a Skyline problem." A flight attendant who had been silent throughout the confrontation approached cautiously. "Inspectors," she said quietly, "some of us have tried to report these issues internally. There's an unwritten policy from management about passenger demographics and cabin placement that many of us are uncomfortable with." Captain Bradshaw cut her off sharply. "Return to your station immediately." The whistleblowing attempt didn't go unnoticed by the Washingtons or the now attentive passengers. Isaiah made a note in his portfolio. "We'll be reviewing internal policies as part of our investigation," he assured the flight attendant. As the captain retreated to the cockpit, visibly shaken, the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. Passengers who had been silent or complicit earlier now expressed outrage and solidarity. Grace Chen had become an impromptu collector of testimony, passengers lining up to share their experiences with her and the Washingtons. Meredith Parker and Trevor Blake maintained their distance occasionally, whispering urgently in the galley. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The aircraft continued its journey eastward, But what had begun as a simple first-class flight had evolved into something much more significant. The start of an investigation that would eventually reshape an entire airline's culture and establish new industry standards for equal treatment. For Isaiah and Zoe Washington, what should have been a simple celebration of their daughter's achievement had become yet another battlefield in their lifelong fight for equality and safety in the skies. The revelation of their professional identities had torn away the curtain, exposing a problem far bigger than a single flight or incident. The real work was just beginning. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom as Flight Skyline 1143 began its descent into Reagan National Airport. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. The announcement carried none of the warmth or personality typically injected into such communications. In the first-class cabin, an uneasy silence had settled. Meredith Parker and Trevor Blake performed their duties with mechanical precision, avoiding eye contact with the Washingtons. Isaiah glanced at his watch, exactly 3 hours and 22 minutes since they had revealed their FAA credentials. In that time, they had collected testimony from 14 passengers and 3 crew members, all documenting a pattern of discriminatory behavior at Skyline Airways. Approaching final descent, Zoe murmured, gazing out the window at the Washington Monument gleaming in the distance. Their daughter Jasmine would be waiting at the airport, unaware of the drama that had unfolded during her parents' journey. As the aircraft touched down with a gentle thud and began taxiing toward the terminal, Isaiah noticed unusual activity through his window. A black SUV with government plates was positioned near their arrival gate, accompanied by what appeared to be airline management vehicles. "They've called in the cavalry," he commented quietly to Zoe. "Not surprising," she replied. "Corporate damage control." The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Captain Bradshaw's voice returned, noticeably strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Reagan National Airport. Local time is 4:17 p.m., with clear skies and a temperature of 76 degrees. For your convenience, please remain seated until the aircraft reaches the gate. Certain passengers in first class will be deplaning first." Richard Davenport, who had remained uncharacteristically silent since his failed apology, gathered his belongings with exaggerated focus, avoiding looking in the Washington's direction. As the jet bridge connected with a soft thump, Trevor Blake approached. "Inspectors, Washington, would you mind deplaning first? There are some individuals who would like to speak with you." "Thank you, but we'll deplane in the normal sequence," Isaiah replied firmly. "Any official discussions can wait until all passengers have safely exited." Trevor nodded stiffly and retreated to the galley. Grace Chen, who had moved to a vacant first-class seat with the crew's reluctant permission, leaned across the aisle. "I've shared all my video documentation with 27 passengers. Whatever happens next, there are too many witnesses for this to disappear." "Thank you," Zoe said sincerely. "Your courage is appreciated." When the doors finally opened, Isaiah and Zoe allowed the other passengers to proceed ahead of them, partly out of courtesy and partly to observe the deplaning procedures for any additional violations. Standing just inside the jet bridge was a distinguished older gentleman in an expensive suit. His silver hair and commanding presence marked him as an executive even before he spoke. Inspectors Washington Walter Sullivan, Skyline Customer Service Director, he introduced himself with a practiced smile. "I understand there was an unfortunate misunderstanding during your flight today." Isaiah regarded him steadily. "Mr. Sullivan, there was no misunderstanding. There was a clear pattern of discriminatory treatment and multiple safety violations, all documented and witnessed." Sullivan's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened. "We at Skyline take such allegations very seriously. I have premium lounge passes and travel vouchers for your inconvenience, and I'd be happy to discuss any concerns privately." "That won't be necessary," Zoe replied. "This isn't a customer service matter. It's a regulatory issue that will be addressed through official channels. Sullivan's smile faltered slightly. Perhaps we could. Walter, let me handle this. The new voice belonged to an elegantly dressed woman in her early 50s who approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. Victoria Harrington, Regional Director for Skyline Airways, she announced, extending her hand. I flew in from Atlanta specifically to address this situation. Isaiah shook her hand briefly. We appreciate your concern, Miss Harrington, but as we told Mr. Sullivan, this matter will be processed through official FAA channels. Victoria lowered her voice. Inspectors, I think we all understand that misunderstandings can occur in high-stress environments like commercial aviation. Our crew members are under tremendous pressure, and while there may have been a lapse in customer service, I'm confident we can resolve this without formal proceedings. Ms. Harrington Zoe responded evenly. What occurred today wasn't a lapse in customer service. It was discrimination followed by retaliatory action when we raised safety concerns. These are serious violations of federal regulations. Victoria's professional demeanor slipped momentarily. I would caution against making such accusations without considering the potential misinterpretations or career implications for all involved. Isaiah recognized the veiled threat immediately. Are you suggesting there might be consequences for filing an accurate report? Victoria backpedaled quickly. Not at all. I'm simply suggesting that a collaborative resolution might be more productive than an adversarial one. As they conversed, passengers from the flight passed by, many offering supportive glances to the Washingtons. Grace Chen paused briefly. Inspectors, I've emailed you the documentation I mentioned. 16 videos from different Skyline flights over the past 6 months. She handed Zoe a business card. I'm a civil rights attorney. Call me if you need anything else. Victoria Harrington's expression tightened as she watched Grace continue down the jet bridge. As I was saying, Ms. Harrington, Isaiah interrupted firmly. We appreciate your willingness to address this situation. However, based on passenger testimony, this appears to be a systemic issue, rather than an isolated incident. That requires formal investigation, not a private conversation in an airport terminal. Their discussion was interrupted by a squeal of delight as a young woman in graduation regalia rushed toward them. Jasmine Washington embraced her parents tightly. Mom, Dad, I thought I'd surprise you at the gate. Why are you still on the jet bridge? And why are all these airline people hovering around you? Isaiah embraced his daughter warmly. Occupational hazard, sweetheart. We'll explain everything later. He turned to the Skyline executives. If you'll excuse us, we're here to celebrate our daughter's graduation. Of course, Victoria replied with forced graciousness. But please take my card. I hope we can continue this conversation soon. As the Washingtons walked away with their daughter, Sullivan muttered to Victoria, "This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen." The captain said at least 30 passengers witnessed the whole thing, and that lawyer was recording everything. Damage control. Walter, Victoria responded tersely. Call legal immediately. We need to get ahead of this before it hits social media. What they didn't know was that it already had. As the Washingtons collected their checked luggage, Isaiah's phone buzzed with a notification. Grace Chen's video of the confrontation had already been shared over 5,000 times on multiple platforms with the hashtag number Skyline Discrimination trending nationally. Outside the terminal, a local news crew was setting up equipment, having received tips about the incident from multiple passengers. Dad, what exactly happened on that flight? Jasmine asked, looking concerned. Isaiah put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. A teaching moment, sweetheart. One that's going to turn into a case study for your airline management ethics class next semester. As they walked toward the parking garage, Zoe checked her phone again. 27 emails from passengers already, all offering testimony. She looked at Isaiah meaningfully. This isn't going away with travel vouchers. Isaiah nodded, his expression resolute. It was never going to. Their celebration weekend would proceed as planned, but in the background, the machinery of regulatory investigation was already beginning to turn, a process that would eventually reach far beyond a single flight or airline touching on issues that had persisted in commercial aviation for decades. 1 week later, Jasmine Washington stood tall, in her blue graduation gown, golden honors cords draped around her neck. As she crossed the stage at Howard University's commencement ceremony, Isaiah and Zoe applauded proudly from the audience, momentarily setting aside the whirlwind that had engulfed them since their flight. Jasmine Washington, Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering, summa cum laude, the announcer proclaimed as she accepted her diploma. The celebration dinner that evening at an upscale Georgetown restaurant was everything they had planned, for though the conversation inevitably turned to the incident that had now made national headlines. "Professor Jenkins used your case in our aviation ethics seminar yesterday," Jasmine told her parents over dessert. "The video has over 3 million views now." Isaiah sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "It was never supposed to be about us. We just wanted a nice flight to your graduation." "But it's making a difference," Jasmine insisted. "People are finally talking about what's been happening for years." The following morning, Isaiah and Zoe reported to the FAA's Washington headquarters for a meeting that would formally launch the investigation. The conference room overlooked the Potomac River, its large table surrounded by senior officials from various divisions. Inspectors Washington greeted Deputy Administrator Eleanor Simmons, a veteran regulator with 30 years of experience. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "As do we," Zoe replied as they took their seats. FAA Chief Counsel Martin Rivera opened a leather portfolio. "We've reviewed your preliminary report and the supporting documentation. The evidence is substantial." "And growing," Isaiah added. "We've received testimony from 87 passengers on different Skyline flights reporting similar experiences over the past 18 months. Rivera nodded grimly. Skyline CEO Harrison Wells has requested a meeting tomorrow. Their legal team is already pushing back, claiming this was an isolated incident involving misunderstandings by junior crew members. "It wasn't," asserted Regional Safety Director Alicia Dominguez, sliding a folder across the table. "We've uncovered 26 discrimination complaints against Skyline that were buried by their customer relations department over the past 2 years. Most never reached regulatory channels." Deputy Administrator Simmons leaned forward. "Based on the evidence, we're forming a special task force. This investigation will examine not just the incident you experienced, but Skyline's entire corporate culture and compliance history. We'd like you both to lead it," Rivera added. "Your unique perspective as both inspectors and directly affected parties makes you ideally positioned to conduct a thorough review." Isaiah and Zoe exchanged glances, silently communicating as they often did during critical professional moments. "We accept," Isaiah confirmed, "though we should acknowledge the potential perception of conflict of interest." "We've considered that," Simmons assured them. "Your exemplary 20-year records speak for themselves. Additionally, every finding will be independently verified by secondary teams before any enforcement action." The meeting continued for 3 hours, establishing investigation parameters and resources. When they emerged, their phones buzzed simultaneously with breaking news alerts. Skyline Airways CEO Harrison Wells had called an emergency press conference. On the television in the FAA lobby, Wells stood at a podium, his silver hair perfectly styled and his blue suit immaculate. At 59, he projected authority and confidence, though the strain around his eyes betrayed his concern. Skyline Airways has always prided itself on providing excellent service to all passengers, Wells declared to the assembled reporters. "The recent allegations against our crew members represent a serious deviation from our values if accurate." His careful qualifier wasn't lost on the Washingtons. "We are conducting our own internal investigation into these claims," Wells continued. "While we believe this was an isolated incident resulting from misunderstandings, Rather than any systemic issues, we remain committed to ensuring all passengers feel welcome aboard our aircraft." A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Mr. Wells, how do you respond to Grace Chen's compilation video showing similar discriminatory treatment across multiple Skyline flights?" Wells's expression tightened. "We haven't verified the authenticity of those recordings. Many appear edited or taken out of context." "That's simply false," Zoe murmured as they watched. Another reporter pressed sources indicate the FAA inspectors documented multiple safety violations during the flight. "Can you address those allegations? Any safety concerns would have been immediately addressed had they been properly communicated." Wells deflected. "Skyline safety record speaks for itself." The press conference deteriorated further as reporters asked increasingly pointed questions about Skyline's history of discrimination complaints and safety violations. Meanwhile, across town, Grace Chen was conducting her own press briefing alongside civil rights attorneys and former Skyline employees who had come forward with corroborating accounts. "This isn't about one flight or two passengers," Grace explained to the assembled journalists. "This is about a corporate culture that systematically devalues passengers of color and retaliates against employees who speak up." Former Skyline flight attendant Tanya Rodriguez described being reprimanded for excessive attentiveness to economy passengers after she provided equal service to all travelers, regardless of race. "We were unofficially trained to profile passengers," Rodriguez revealed. Certain passengers were labeled premium priorities based almost entirely on appearance and perceived status. As these testimonies aired on split screen with Wells's increasingly defensive press conference, Skyline's stock price plummeted, dropping 15% in a single trading session. By evening, Richard Davenport's company had issued a statement distancing themselves from his behavior on the flight. "Kavanaugh Industries firmly condemns the discriminatory comments made by our employee, Mr. Davenport has been placed on administrative leave pending review." 3 days later, the FAA task force obtained internal Skyline emails revealing the existence of a problematic passenger classification system called Premium Passenger Profiling Protocol. The protocol explicitly instructed crew members to provide enhanced service to passengers who appear to be frequent premium travelers based on criteria that, while not explicitly mentioning race, created clear disparate impact. "This is worse than we thought," Isaiah commented as they reviewed the documents in their temporary office at FAA headquarters. "These directives violate not just aviation regulations but potentially civil rights laws." Zoe nodded grimly. "And look at this maintenance log discrepancy pattern. They've been systematically underreporting minor safety issues to avoid triggering automatic inspections." As the investigation expanded, more Skyline employees came forward. Whistleblower protections were invoked for multiple staff members who described a corporate environment where raising concerns about discrimination or safety was career suicide. By the investigation's third week, Skyline's board of directors called an emergency meeting. The company's stock had fallen 30%, bookings were down, and major corporate clients were suspending their travel contracts. Meanwhile, Isaiah and Zoe balanced their professional responsibilities with supporting their daughter, who had received multiple job offers following her graduation, including one from NASA's Diversity in Engineering program. "I'm proud of you both," Jasmine told them over dinner at their hotel. "You've turned what happened into something that might change the whole industry." Isaiah smiled at his daughter. "That was always the goal of our careers, sweetheart. One aircraft, one airline, one regulation at a time. Change happens slowly, but it happens." What none of them realized that evening was just how significant that change would be as their investigation continued to uncover evidence that would ultimately transform not just one airline, but industry standards nationwide. 3 months after flight, Skyline 1143. Isaiah and Zoe Washington stood in the Department of Transportation's main conference room as FAA Administrator Patricia Lockhart addressed the assembled press corps. Today we announce the completion of our investigation into Skyline Airways' operational and service practices, Administrator Lockhart stated firmly. The findings have resulted in the largest civil penalty in FAA history, $42 million for systematic safety violations and discriminatory practices that contravene federal aviation regulations. Flashbulbs illuminated the room as reporters captured the historic moment. Isaiah and Zoe remained professionally composed despite the magnitude of the announcement. Additionally, Lockhart continued, Skyline Airways will implement a comprehensive 3-year remediation plan under direct FAA supervision, including mandatory retraining for all staff, revision of all service protocols, and implementation of an independent oversight committee to monitor compliance. Outside Skyline headquarters in Atlanta, a different press conference was taking place. Harrison Wells, now former CEO, announced his resignation to pursue other opportunities, though industry insiders recognized the forced departure for what it was. The board had replaced him with Dr. Regina Carter, a respected aviation executive with a strong record on both safety and inclusivity. Skyline acknowledges the serious failures identified in the FAA investigation, Dr. Carter stated in her first public address. We are committed not just to addressing these specific issues, but to becoming industry leaders in equitable service and safety excellence. The consequences extended to individual crew members as well. Captain Miles Bradshaw, Meredith Parker, and Trevor Blake had all been removed from flight duties pending completion of extensive retraining and cultural competency programs. Their personnel files now contained formal reprimands that would follow their careers. At Howard University, Jasmine Washington had organized a symposium titled Equity at 30000 Feet Transforming Aviation Culture. The event featured her parents as keynote speakers, alongside Grace Chen, whose documentary Above the Clouds: Race and Space in American Skies had premiered at the DC Independent Film Festival to critical acclaim. What began as a simple flight to see their daughter graduate became a catalyst for industry-wide change, Grace explained in her film's opening narration. But it wasn't just about 2 FAA inspectors facing discrimination. It was about countless passengers who had endured similar treatment without the platform or power to demand accountability. The documentary included testimony from dozens of passengers and former Skyline employees, creating an undeniable pattern that corporate damage control could not dismiss. Isaiah and Zoe had become reluctant public figures in the fight against discrimination. They had established the Sky Equity Foundation using their settlement from Skyline to fund scholarships for minorities pursuing careers in aviation. This was never about us, Isaiah explained during a CNN interview. It was about ensuring that every passenger, regardless of race or background, receives equal treatment and safety protections when they board an aircraft in this country. The ripple effects continued throughout the industry. 6 other major airlines proactively launched internal reviews of their service practices and safety protocols, eager to avoid similar scrutiny. The Department of Transportation issued new guidelines for anti-discrimination training requirements across all federally regulated transportation sectors. Even Richard Davenport had experienced consequences for his role in the incident. Though he had retained his position at Kavanaugh Industries after diversity training and a public apology, his career advancement prospects had dimmed considerably. More importantly, colleagues reported a genuine shift in his attitude and awareness. On a crisp autumn morning, 1 year after the incident, Isaiah and Zoe Washington boarded another flight, this time to visit their daughter at NASA's Johnson Space Center, where she had begun her engineering career. Unlike their previous journey, they openly wore their FAA credentials on lanyards around their necks. The diverse flight crew greeted them with professional courtesy that contained neither the obsequiousness of fear nor the chill of prejudice, simply the equal respect every passenger deserved. "Welcome aboard, Inspectors Washington," the flight attendant smiled genuinely. "Thank you for everything you've done for our industry." As they settled into their seats, Isaiah noticed a placard in the seat back pocket. Skyline Airways is committed to providing equal service and safety to all passengers. If you experience or witness any concerns, please scan this QR code to submit a confidential report directly to our Independent Oversight Committee. Similar policies had been adopted by airlines nationwide, part of the new passenger equity assurance standards that had emerged from the Washington investigation. "It's a start," Zoe commented, noting his observation of the card. "It always is," Isaiah replied, reaching for her hand as the aircraft began its taxi. Justice and transformation happen one step at a time. As they soared above the clouds, the Washingtons reflected on their journey, not just the physical distance from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. that had sparked an industry revolution, but the longer path of their careers dedicated to making the skies safer and more equitable for everyone. The incident that began with discrimination had transformed into something powerful: accountability reform and the promise of better skies ahead for all who traveled them. This story teaches us that true change requires both courage and position. Isaiah and Zoe Washington could have quietly accepted their mistreatment, but they chose to stand up not just for themselves, but for countless others who lacked their authority and platform. Their professionalism in the face of discrimination demonstrates how dignity can be maintained even in humiliating circumstances. The transformation of Skyline Airways reminds us that systemic problems require systemic solutions. One complaint might be dismissed, but patterns of behavior backed by evidence cannot be ignored. The airline's discriminatory practices weren't addressed through travel vouchers or superficial apologies, but through fundamental policy changes and accountability at every level. Perhaps most importantly, this story shows us that speaking truth to power works best when that truth is meticulously documented and professionally presented. The Washingtons didn't react emotionally, despite justifiable anger. Instead, they gathered evidence, built alliances with witnesses, and worked through proper channels to create lasting change. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it? What would you have done in the Washingtons' position? Comment below with your own experiences confronting injustice. If you found value in this story about standing up against racism, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Thank you for joining our community of people committed to making a difference. Remember, the most powerful words in any language are, "That's not right, and I'm going to do something about it."